Emily had never been the type to attend blind dates, especially not ones meant for someone else. She was used to 12-hour shifts, fluorescent hospital lights, and the constant beeping of monitors. Romance, fancy dinners, and candlelight conversations were things she only saw in movies. So when her roommate and closest friend, Claire, came running into their tiny apartment, begging her to take her place on a blind date, Emily laughed at the absurdity. "Me, Claire, I'll make a fool of myself. Look at me. My hair hasn't seen a proper salon in months, and my nails are ruined from all the disinfectants," Emily protested, holding up her worn hands. Claire clasped her shoulders with urgency. "Please, Em, I can't cancel again, and I swear this guy is just too uptight for me. You'll only be there for dinner. Just smile, keep him company, and that's it. He'll never see you again." Emily wanted to refuse. She hated lies, even small ones. But the pleading look in Claire's eyes, combined with the exhaustion of her own endless routine, made her soften. Maybe one night away from the hospital halls wouldn't hurt. With a sigh, she agreed, though her stomach tightened with nerves. Borrowing one of Claire's dresses, a simple navy blue piece that hugged her figure more than she liked, Emily stood before the mirror, hardly recognizing the woman staring back. She had always hidden behind scrubs and practicality, never the elegance of silk and heels. Her reflection looked nervous, fragile, but also hopeful, though she wouldn't admit it aloud. By the time she reached the restaurant, her courage was already fraying. The building rose like a palace, with glass walls shimmering under the city lights. Inside, the warmth of golden chandeliers reflected off crystal glasses and polished marble floors. Laughter and clinking silverware filled the air. Emily froze at the entrance, her heart racing. This wasn't her world. She belonged with patients who couldn't afford care, with late-night vending machine dinners, with exhaustion pulling at her bones. But she took a breath, straightened her borrowed dress, and told herself it was only one evening. Just dinner. No one had to know who she really was. And with that, she stepped into a night that would change her life forever. Emily's pulse quickened as she scanned the glittering room. Every man seemed intimidating in his sharp suit, every woman perfectly polished. She nearly turned to leave when her eyes landed on a figure seated alone at a corner table. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that spoke of power without arrogance. His dark hair was neatly styled, but there was something weary in the way he rubbed his temple, as though the weight of the world rested there. Then his gaze lifted, and Emily froze. Their eyes locked, hers wide and uncertain, his piercing yet surprisingly gentle. He rose immediately, pushing his chair back with a smooth, old-fashioned courtesy. "You must be Claire," he said, his voice deep, steady, the kind that carried authority but also warmth. Emily's throat went dry. For a heartbeat, she considered confessing everything, that she wasn't Claire, that this was a mistake. But the kindness in his eyes disarmed her. She nodded shyly, whispering, "Yes. Thank you for waiting." He gestured for her to sit, and she slid into the chair, praying he wouldn't notice her trembling hands. The table between them was adorned with a single candle, its flame flickering between their faces. Alexander studied her, not in the predatory way some men did, but with quiet curiosity. "I wasn't sure what to expect," he admitted, lips curving faintly. "But you don't seem like someone who does this often." Emily nearly choked on her water. "That obvious." "Not in a bad way," he assured quickly, leaning forward slightly. "It's just, most people come in here ready to impress. You look like you'd rather be anywhere else." She flushed, fiddling with the edge of her napkin. "Hospitals don't prepare you for five-star dining rooms." That caught his attention. His brows rose. "Hospitals. I'm a nurse," she confessed, before realizing she'd said too much. Most people she'd dated lost interest the moment they heard about long shifts, modest pay, and exhaustion. But Alexander didn't pull back. His expression softened, and for the first time that evening, the tension in his shoulders seemed to ease. "A nurse," he repeated slowly, as though the word itself carried respect. "That explains the honesty in your eyes." Emily blinked, unsure what to say. But the way he looked at her, as if he saw her, not the borrowed dress, not the pretense, made her chest flutter in a way she hadn't felt in years. For the first time that night, she smiled without forcing it. Their meals had just arrived when a sudden sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the elegant dining room. Emily turned, startled, just in time to see a small boy racing across the floor, weaving past waiters and startled guests. His dark hair bounced as he ran, his little face alight with excitement. "Daddy!" the boy called, his small arms stretching toward Alexander. Emily froze, fork halfway to her lips. "Daddy!" Alexander stood instantly, his carefully composed CEO demeanor slipping into something warmer, more vulnerable. He bent down, catching the boy in his arms as the child flung himself forward. "Ethan," Alexander murmured, his voice filled with a tenderness Emily hadn't heard before. "You were supposed to be with Mrs. Collins tonight." The nanny appeared moments later, breathless and apologetic. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Reed. He was insistent on seeing you, wouldn't settle until we came here." Alexander sighed, clearly torn between frustration and affection. But instead of scolding, he ruffled Ethan's hair and set him gently on his lap. "It's all right," he said to the nanny before turning his attention back to his son. Emily watched, her heart unexpectedly melting at the sight. This powerful, intimidating man who carried himself with authority was, at his core, just a father doing his best. Ethan leaned against his chest, completely at ease, and Emily's chest tightened with something she couldn't quite name. The boy's curious gaze landed on her then. "Who's that?" he asked, pointing his small finger toward Emily. Caught off guard, she offered a soft smile. "I'm Emily, a friend of your dad's." Ethan studied her with a seriousness that made her laugh. Then, without hesitation, he reached across the table and grabbed her hand with his tiny fingers. "Will you play with me?" Emily blinked, stunned, but before she could respond, Alexander's eyes lifted to hers. For a fleeting moment, all the walls he had built around himself seemed to drop. There was a quiet plea in his gaze, almost as though he was asking her not to pull away, not from Ethan, and not from him. And Emily didn't. She leaned closer to the boy, her smile genuine now. "Of course I will." In that instant, something shifted between them all. A connection, fragile yet undeniable, had been formed. Dinner ended far later than Emily expected. Between Alexander's quiet questions, her own laughter at Ethan's innocent chatter, and the comfortable silences that followed, time slipped away unnoticed. When they finally stepped outside, the city air felt cool against her flushed cheeks, the night humming with distant traffic and the glow of streetlights. Alexander walked beside her, Ethan holding his father's hand tightly with one small fist and Emily's with the other, as if he had already decided. They were all connected. The gesture was so natural that Emily's heart clenched. She reminded herself it wasn't real, this was just one night, one dinner she was never supposed to attend. And yet, it already felt like more. They paused at the curb where a sleek black car waited. Alexander's driver stepped forward, but Alexander lifted a hand, signaling him to wait. For a long moment, he simply looked at Emily. His sharp, businesslike features seemed softer under the lamplight, shadows deepening the tired lines around his eyes. "I wasn't expecting this," he said finally, his voice low. "Honestly, I wasn't expecting much at all tonight. But you surprised me." Emily shifted, suddenly self-conscious. "I'm not sure I did anything special. I just talked." "That's exactly it," Alexander replied, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Most people I meet only want the company name, the influence, the wealth. But you," he stopped himself, shaking his head slightly, as though catching words too vulnerable to release. "You didn't look at me like a CEO. You looked at me like a man." Her breath caught. She should tell him the truth. That she wasn't even the woman he was supposed to meet, that this whole evening was an accident. But then Ethan tugged at her hand, his bright eyes lifting to hers. "Will you come play with me again?" the boy asked, his voice hopeful, unguarded. Emily knelt instinctively, smoothing back his hair. "If your dad says it's okay," she whispered. When she looked up, Alexander's gaze met hers, steady and searching. In it, she saw loneliness, longing, and a flicker of something more, a desire not to let this connection slip away. "Then it's settled," he said softly, as though it were the simplest decision in the world. "We'll see you again." And though every rational part of Emily's mind screamed that she didn't belong in his world, her heart whispered yes. For the first time in years, she chose to listen.